Mike, really looking forward to getting into this important conversation. Since you and I started talking offline or through DMs last week about this idea of how not to buy, when not to buy, how to keep ourselves from buying. I know that we've had this discussion before, but this seems to be something that is on a lot of people's minds. It's really on mine. It's clearly on yours. What we're going to be doing today is not going to be an interview. We're just going to be talking about this issue that seems to really affect a lot of people in the hobby, and that is how to stop ourselves from buying cards that we don't want at a frequency that we don't want. So first of all, thank you for jumping on for this discussion. I've just been so excited to talk to you for a while now. Your podcast, Fondling Cardboard, is an inspiration for its professionalism and how it's put together, and its just sound quality and everything else. And we can get to that later, maybe if we have time. But first, let's talk about the most important thing, which is what prompted you to open up the conversation with me about this broader idea of overbuying.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment there. The reason I brought this subject up is that you and I are on the same wavelength in terms of we're collectors and we live in the shallow end. So we're not investing in $1,000 cards all the time. We're buying those $5, $10, $20 cards that hit a bit of a nerve emotionally, nostalgically. And so when you have that kind of collecting philosophy, it's so easy to just buy nearly everything you see that you love the look of or that resonates with you personally. And I've personally had issues with collecting stacks of cards that are all, lower end, let's say. And it's caused my hobby experience to be limited, restricted, and in some cases a bit stressful.
So we have similar backgrounds, similar collecting experiences, and I think others have as well. In the previous episode of my podcast, this one, the shallow end, I talked about not being able to buy some cards for a while because I sent some cards off to grading. I fully recognize this as a first world problem. There are many worse problems that a person can have. Usually with an episode, I get feedback from no people up to 2 or 3 people. And this one, it's been close to right around a half dozen, ranging from, hey, I've got the same problem. I've been in the same space before. Haha, that sort of a thing, to a couple who have written about expressing what I can only interpret as this addiction to cards and addiction to transactions. And while I'm certainly not qualified to speak on something like addiction, I can understand where they were coming from, where the buying and the buying and the buying after a while becomes less about the cards and more about the feeling that one gets when hitting buy or when that thing comes in the mail.
Hmm. What's interesting, as a Canadian, I actually don't get mail days very often. So the way that I actually purchase cards typically is from American sellers on eBay or people that I'm connected with. I run a group on Facebook called Golf Cards and Memorabilia. And as the golf card collector, those are my people. And if I'm doing trades with my friends or buying cards from people in my group, typically people in the United States want to ship domestically. Internationally costs $15 in some cases versus $5 domestically. And if I'm buying stuff on eBay, especially, you know how many transactions a collector can do in a month or a year. And so that extra $10 per transaction, especially when you're in the shallow end, can really add up. Like, shipping ends up being more than the card itself. So I use a service called Ship My Cards. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I just love their service. And so they basically provide a United States address for me, and they receive all of my cards. And they accumulate there until I'm ready to send a batch home for, a consolidated price. So I actually don't get those mail days like a lot of Americans do. And when I do, it's actually very exciting. Or I get a large entire collection, basically. Like, I get, 6 months worth of cards. So it's caused me to not be able to live in this quick flip kind of world, which is fine because I don't necessarily enjoy that aspect. I just enjoy the cards themselves. So I don't get the thrill of receiving and opening cards very often. I get the thrill of hitting buy it now, bidding on auctions, and it ends up a problem for me because I'm not aware of how many cards I'm buying unless I'm just paying attention to my credit card and my bank account. And so that's one aspect. Another issue that I deal with is a lot of people are buying these ultra modern cards, and I'm in the same boat. We're attracted to the newest thing, the shiniest thing. And in golf cards, there was a long hiatus between 2014 and 2021 where we weren't getting new releases other than multi-sport sets. Goodwin Champions basically was it. Even Topps, Allen, and Ginter wasn't really producing golf cards. So there was a long period where people were starved for golf cards. So since 2021, which is only 2.5 years ago, was the first golf release, I've just been going hammer time on collecting all kinds of golf cards. And it's hard because it's not sustainable if you keep doing that, or else you have to be in a hamster wheel of selling off a lot of the cards you end up, you bought a year ago or 6 months ago just to fund the next stuff you're getting. And from a financial perspective, it can be challenging because you're paying for all this shipping. And so you have to reinvest from your paycheck month over month just to sustain your collection of the same size, unless you're making really intelligent buying and selling moves.
One impulse buy can be fun from time to time, but those impulse buys that really start to add up, even the ones that are, say, $10 or less. Can you think of an example of yours in the recent past where you've impulsed buy? I actually somehow managed to catch myself recently doing it so about the last couple of months now, I've done this thing that I actually really like that's actually working, where I'm capping my collections at no more than 4 cards per player. I have found that I really I love baseball. I'm a baseball card collector. And I've got cards, a couple that are pre-war up to active players, ultra modern. And because I appreciate the game's history, by capping it at 4, that allows me to expand who I collect, which is great. On the other hand, once I've hit 4, I start looking at other players who I might not be interested in. And I noticed the other day that I, for whatever reason, had about 8 different Julio Rodriguez cards in my watch list on eBay, whereas about 48 hours before I had none. And thankfully, I don't know where this moment of clarity came from. It was like, no, stop. And I just wiped them all out of my watch list because there are other cards that I would like to get at some point, other players who I'd much rather collect, who have more than a 2-year track history at this point. And if I really want Julio, then I think that we all know that 5 years from now, unless he turns into Babe Ruth, they're going to be a lot cheaper. So I think that was an example of somehow I had a moment of clarity where I was able to avoid the impulse buy, where if I was I'm recording this episode at my office, but if I was at home, I could pull up 100 examples of me where I didn't have that restraint. But how about you? How are you with impulse purchases?
I'm not good at it. My wife's not over my shoulder, so I can be totally honest here. I'll give you an example where there was a particular card and type of card that is 100% in my lane. The type of card that hits every checklist for me, and yet it can still be a problem when it comes to impulse buying. So 2021 Goodwin Champions has a parallel of both the base cards and the goodie insert set called Cosmic. And it's serial numbered out of 99, and it had this beautiful background of the cosmos behind the players. And when this came out, I wasn't aware of it ahead of time. So the way that I first came across it was on an eBay auction that triggered one of my Tiger Woods save searches. And when I was flipping through my phone and I came across it, I just stopped in my tracks and I was stunned. I was like, oh my God, I need this card. I almost had a panic because it was listed for $130 US. It's a Tiger Woods card, serial numbered out of 99. So I was thinking it isn't all that far off on, what I think the value could be for this card. It's the very first time that golf cards had been printed on chrome stock, like Topps Chrome or Panini Prism. So it's kind of this first of its kind type of card. And not only that, but in the past, I had been trying to collect zero gravity basketball inserts, which has space in the background. I'm not a total space junkie, but I absolutely love the imagery and the concept of space. So basically, this Tiger Woods card just hit everything for me, and I was obsessed instantly. I just thought, I don't want to smash buy it now. I'll throw an offer out to the seller of $100 instead of 130. I thought that was a very reasonable offer, especially since the set had just come out. That prices are going to be high, and I was just willing to overpay because I wanted it. But I thought maybe there's time to negotiate. But 20 minutes after I sent the offer, someone else smashed buy it now, and my heart was broken. In fact, in my podcast, Fondling Cardboard, I did an entire episode dedicated to this. It
I
was my
remember that.
second ever episode about cosmic golf cards, because Goodwin Champions at that time had, I think, about 7 golfers in the set. So when I lost that, I immediately went into regret, into fear of missing out. And so I did research. I found out all the other golfers. I set up all new save searches for Bryson DeChambeau, Matthew Wolff, Lexi Thompson, Sahith Theegala, Tiger Woods, all the other golfers. And whenever they popped up, I was instantly buying them or bidding on their auctions. Knowing all, fair enough, I'm probably going to be overspending as much as twice as much as the card may settle at. However, it didn't quite work out that way, because the next Tiger Woods that popped up was $180 Canadian, so $125 US, and I just smashed by it now. I thought, I don't want to miss out on this one. Then a concept appeared called the law of diminishing returns. Once you have something, to get another copy of that thing or a very similar thing isn't going to provide as much value to your life. So once I have one copy of this Tiger Woods card for $125, if I want a second copy, which I do, I'm somebody that likes collecting duplicates of things I love. I'm not willing to pay $125 for it, but I might be willing to pay $90 for it, right? Because I think I'm getting value, or I'm cost base averaging. Even though I don't invest in my cards, I'm willing to have multiples if it brings my overall collection's average cost down. However, it's a bit of a false narrative when it comes to collecting. If I was buying it thinking I'm getting good value for my money and I'm going to flip it, then that might be a smart move. However, I'm just collecting it because I love the card. So I end up spending $90 for a second copy, and then another copy comes up for $70, so I buy it. And then another one comes up for $50, so I buy it. In fact, it kind of leveled off at $50 for a while, and I bought a couple more copies. And not only that, but there's the base version and the Gaudi version. So now I'm buying 2, 3, 4 copies of each version. And so suddenly I've spent hundreds of dollars. In fact, probably $1,000, including Colin Morikawa and all the other golfers that I wanted to collect, and buying multiple copies of those as well. So suddenly I'm not paying attention, but this ball is kind of picking up speed, rolling down the hill. And suddenly these cosmic parallel cards, which weren't necessarily, they're not established, they might not carry future value, but I'm kind of going all in. It's kind of becoming a big base part of my collection. Now, the law of diminishing returns means that, every 20 to 30% in a price drop means that's kind of my threshold for being willing to buy it. I saw a few more of these Tiger Woods cosmic cards get listed for buy it now with a Chinese seller. And one concept that I like here in Canada is that I like buying internationally from other countries other than the United States, because I kind of feel like I have an advantage. They're willing to ship direct to me for, instead of $5 domestic within the US, it might cost me $7 or $8. But I know Americans are probably paying the same price, so I'm not necessarily at a disadvantage when it comes to buying. And so I sent this Chinese platform a message saying, would you be willing to do a bulk deal? I'll give you $25 each for these Tiger Woods Cosmic cards. So I picked up all three for $25 plus a bunch of other Cosmic parallels. And then just as recent as last week, this same Tiger Woods Cosmic card was on auction. I ended up winning it for $13.50. So I know that's a long-winded story, but I wanted to kind of bring you along so that you could feel some of the emotions that I was going through as it went from $130 down 10x to $13.
And if I'm hearing you right, with you owning all these copies and your willingness to pay less and pay less and pay less, if you do decide to move them at some point, you have essentially lowered the comps on yourself in a way as well, which I imagine is a whole different type of frustration.
Well, not only lowered the comps myself, but if I wasn't so obsessed with this parallel, the comps would probably be even lower, which means I don't necessarily have market validation. I have personal validation.
Right. I get that. And it's interesting how we rationalize with ourselves about how we need a card, where our endorphins spike, something spikes when we see something. And all the lessons that we've learned in the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years that we've been back in the hobby, it's as if there's some sort of a blocker in our brains temporarily, because there's this, I don't want to say FOMO, fear of missing out, because that has to do with something else a little bit, but it's more of a fear of missing what we think that we require, where we've decided that in that moment, this is what our PC should be, could be, and it's like time stops. Time stops, and for me anyway, and I forget that, especially if it's not a numbered card, this thing is likely going to pop up again in 45 minutes, in 10 days, or whenever it's going to be. But my brain tricks itself into thinking that if I don't get this now, I will be wasting my time in this hobby, because what I'm trying to build then can't be built. And especially in cards, I was really into 1980s baseball cards last year. And it's really funny because I moved 85 to 90% of them last month when I was trying to get this Red Heart Stan Musial, which I thankfully was able to get. I was very glad to be able to get that, but it seemed like the most important thing in the world last year, that I pick up a J.R. Richard and a PSA 10. And for those who don't know, J.R. Richard was this incredible pitcher in the late 70s and early 80s with the Houston Astros, who very sadly suffered a stroke at the height of his career. And he and Nolan Ryan were this amazing 1-2 punch with the Astros. You faced Nolan Ryan one day and he struck out 12 over 8 innings. And then the next day, J.R. Richard would come up and he'd strike out 12. But no one really remembers him a whole lot unless you're my age, because of the stroke that he suffered. And he suffered it during an era in which there probably would have been a newspaper story in the Houston Chronicle and maybe a follow-up story in a national publication like the Sporting News or Sports Illustrated, but then that was sort of it. And one of the first baseball cards I remember owning was I think it was an 81 Topps J.R. Richard. So I knew who he was even from a very, very young age. And on PWCC, I think it was an 81 or an 82 Fleer J.R. Richard PSA 10 popped up. And at that moment, I thought, I have to get that card. I have to get it. I imagine there were 2 people in the world that I was bidding against. And ended up getting it for, I don't know, somewhere between $28 and $32 on PWCC. And I got it, and I thought, great. It finally came in the mail. I kept it in my PWCC vault. So, whatever. And when I saved up 4 or 5 cards, I paid the fee to have them send my own cards to me. And they did this, and I got it. And it was just really underwhelming, because I realized I still had the memory, but for some reason I thought that capturing the card would somehow enhance the memory, but it didn't. But in the moment that I was bidding on that Sunday night for that J.R. Richard card, it I wish I could explain it. I wish that there was a neurologist or a psychologist or somebody who could explain what took over in those moments that made this feel like the most expensive, not expensive, the most important purchase I could possibly make. And then when I finally come back to reality, when I have the benefit of time, it was just a really silly purchase. It doesn't mean that I have any less fond memories of J.R. Richard, of who he was and what he represented to me in the hobby, and of sort of just memorializing his career and who he was. But this card played no role in it except for that 3-hour window where I thought that I needed it. And I mean, impulse, that's impulse right there, right? It wasn't the direction that I wanted. And I ended up selling it, I think, for $15, right? I think I lost half of it, of what I paid on it, in a matter of the 3 or 4 months that I owned it.
So you end up spending $15 to $20 just to have that experience of 3 hours of obsession and anticipation and excitement and thrill and all of those things that come along with watching an auction and ending up winning it. That's interesting to hear because that sounds like a card that's right up your alley. You have a personal connection to it. It brings up nostalgia for you. And yet it's a card that you ended up regretting and not wanting in the end. And I certainly have examples of that. But as you said, it's really interesting what happens in our brain. Maybe we can banter a bit back and forth about what goes on in your brain. Now, the first thing that I think of is that we are lacking self-control and discipline, because an issue I have is coming up with excuses to buy something. If I sit down and I think about it for 10 minutes rationally and I make pros and cons lists, I ask myself the 6 questions that you talked about in a past episode, I might be able to come to a conclusion not to buy the card. And if I come to a conclusion to buy the card, then it's probably a good purchase. But some of the excuses I tell myself, my birthday was over the weekend. I'd say it's my birthday. I can treat myself to a $15 or $20 card, or God forbid, even more. Another excuse is that I might, want to collect this set. And this is, might not be a card that I would ever buy, but I love the set. And Zero Gravity is a perfect example of that. I bought a Zach LaVine basketball card. He's a player for the Bulls. I have no connection to him. I have no connection to the Bulls other than, admiring Michael Jordan when I was younger. But I bought it because I thought the price seemed pretty good. And I told myself, I love the space. I love these Zero Gravity cards. I still have this damn Zach LaVine card and I don't want it. I don't like it. And nobody's probably willing to pay me more than $3 or $4 for it. And I think I spent $10. So what kind of lies or tricks do you tell yourself subconsciously that convince you, Dave, to be buying these cards that you don't need?
Well, what I do, and it tends to go away within a month or two sometimes, is I decide I'm going to be X collector. I'm going to be someone who collects Topps Chrome black refractors for baseball, right? The ones that are numbered out of 61, 62, 63, depending on the year. That's going to be me. Because I think it becomes more about, I start thinking more about identity sometimes than I do about the collection that makes me happy. And what snaps me out of it is when I see somebody who has been in the hobby for 10, 20 years and is light years ahead of where I want to be. And I didn't know they even existed. And it's like, I would say that somebody stepped into my lane, but it's more like I was dipping a toe into their lane that they have had for years. And I didn't know them. I wasn't aware of it. And all of a sudden I lose the ability, the delusional ability to think that I'm going to be that guy, right? Like I'm going to be the black refractor guy when there is an entire community of black refractor guys already. And for me to reach the level that I want to be will require a level of funds that I don't have unless I want to go cash out my 401k, which I would never even touch. Or I'm going to have to play the long game and think about the year 2039, 15 years from now, where I could really become one of those guys as well. It's interesting how certain moments hit you, certain thoughts come to you at certain times. Sometimes when I sit down to think about it, no thoughts come and I think about something else. But I was doing the dishes on the Sunday, so a couple of days ago from when you and I are recording this. And you referenced those 6 questions that I asked myself. And a different question popped into my head, a 7th question that I think might be more important than some of the other ones. And the one that we always hear is, if you couldn't sell this card, would you still buy it? If you couldn't sell the card for 20 years or 10 years, if you had to hold on to it for a year, would you buy it? And that's a useful question. It has some utility. But there's another question that I had, and I don't think I've heard it asked before, at least not by myself. And that question is, if you couldn't show the card to anyone or tell anyone that you owned it or put it on social or anything, if this was a secret to you and just to you for 6 months or a year or 5 years, would you buy it? And it kind of messed with me a little bit, because then you're thinking entirely about what you're trying to build and not about the applause or the feedback or the likes or the loves that you get, the accolades. I don't know. What do you think about that idea? What if you were buying and could not tell anybody you were buying a card? Then how does that potentially
That's a
take you?
phenomenal question. Um, Funny enough, I do not show off the majority of my collection. I am the golf card collector, and I have a great golf card collection, of which maybe half or less is shown off on my Instagram. And when I say that, I'm not saying I'm not posting bulk cards. I mean, some of the bigger cards I've bought, I just haven't posted. And it could be laziness, or it could be that those were cards that hit so hard with me that when I got them, I just embraced them. I fondled the cardboard, and I didn't think about seeking validation from others. Whereas, funny enough, some of the cards that I've posted on my page or my story on Instagram, even lower end cards, $5, $10, whatever, are cards that when I received it, I realized, why did I buy this? And then I seek a purpose for it, and then I show it off to try and get utility value out of this card that didn't strike that chord as hard as some of my other cards. So what you just said is a wonderful way to encapsulate that into a question to ask yourself before I buy those darn cards. Because ideally, my Instagram page is blank and I don't have to show off anything, because these cards mean so much to me that it's, I'm sitting in my sanctuary enjoying them myself. And, if I've got a family or a close friend who wants to experience that with me, then I can show it off. And actually, I have a box of cards that I call it my favorite box. I responded to Paul's request for the New Year's resolutions show, for this sports card strategy show. And
You're talking about Paul Hickey from Sports Card Strategy and No Off Season.
that's right. Yeah. So, and one of the questions that came up in his episode was one of the audience members asked, how do you organize your cards? And he brought up me as an example, how there's no perfect way to organize your cards. And he said Mike LaCusta probably is constantly shuffling cards around and reorganizing just for the experience of spending time with his cards. And he's absolutely right. I shuffle cards from sorted by player, by year, by era, by talent level, like who's doing really well on the PGA Tour or whatever sport they play. And then, but the thing that kind of stays consistent is what I call my favorite box. And this is where I put cards that I would never consider selling. And so it's got cards from my childhood that I graded. It's got cards worth a couple dollars up to thousands of dollars. And it's basically the box that I pull out when my cousin or my uncle comes over for a barbecue and they say, oh yeah, I heard you have a podcast, or I heard you collect sports cards. And I say, 1 second. I run down to the basement, I grab my favorite box, and that's the one that I get excited about. That's the one. And then they look through the cards and they can see my enthusiasm and my excitement. It's the thing that gets me fired up about the hobby. And it's the thing I would run into my house and save if there was a fire. The rest of my cards, I don't want to call them just filler, because a lot of them have meaning to me too, but I'm kind of coming to realize like you can't enjoy every card in your collection equally if you have thousands of cards. You hit on something earlier though that I really want to touch on. Identity. That's a slippery slope, because when I've noticed friends or family members who begin to identify with something, if that thing is going really well, it can be exciting and fulfilling. But if that thing is stressful, then your whole identity is at risk. So if you have been overspending and you stress over paying your credit card every month and you have to sell some cards just to kind of make hobby ends meet, that can cause your hobby experience to be poor, and it can also cause your identity to feel at risk. I've personally struggled just like you have. I've looked at all kinds of different sets, players, types of cards, trying to fumble my way through the hobby to figure out who I am as a collector. Some of those projects or initiatives have fallen flat. Like I really love 2008 Topps Chrome, because that was kind of my heyday when it came to basketball card collecting. I told myself I want to collect all of the Suns cards in X Fractor. I ended up buying one or two of them and kind of fell flat because I realized, just like you, when I did some research, there's guys out there who have crazy collections from 2008 Topps Chrome because it was such an iconic set.
Is that the set that has Shaq with the Suns?
Yes, it has
It's a
Shaq with
great
the Suns, and
card.
his card's really cool. He's actually like blocking. I don't even know who he's blocking, but it's like stuffing the ball right into their face. Steve Nash is my favorite basketball player, and 2000, I don't know, mid 2000s is when he got back-to-back MVPs, and kind of 2008 was absolutely his prime with the Suns. So it's a meaningful year for me for so many reasons. I've got personal connections. I would I was at the end of high school then, and I would uh, I was a straight A student, but I hated social studies. So I would bring basketball packs. I'd sit at the back of the class, and whenever the teacher was like writing something on the chalkboard, not looking at me, I'd be ripping a pack or two and reading all the cards. I'd get in trouble, and she'd try and take stuff away, and I'd sneak the pack. I'd give her like one card and put the good ones away in my backpack. I have fun memories from that era, and so it was a good connection. What I realized is that I want something that gives me a unique identity. And what's ended up happening is that my successful projects are stuff that nobody else has really gotten into. And so for golf cards, that would be three separate things. 2021 Upper Deck Artifacts Diamond Relics, which is a Upper Deck property that's been used for hockey cards for a long time, but it's the first time that golf cards have gotten Diamond Relics. They're all serial numbered out of 49. There's a couple parallels. There's like a green out of 5, and there's a 1 of 1 of each one. But I'm collecting the out of 49 of all 20. I think there's 24 golfers, and I loved the chase. That was something that was very fulfilling to me to complete. And when I finished it, I said, "What do I do next?" And I began grading them. So I've got a Pop 1 Tiger Woods. There's only one PSA 10, so I was lucky to get that. But I have a second Tiger Woods now. I've got a second Jack Nicklaus. I've got a second Arnold Palmer. Now I'm completing a second complete set, just because there wasn't really something for me to do next. And my favorite golfer, who's my favorite rookie, let's say, his name's Matthew Wolff, and he really fizzled out on the PGA, but now he's playing on Live Golf, and he gets a lot of slack. People use him as an example of a failed golfer, but he's still kind of my PC. So I own like 6 of his Diamond Relics. And that's one area. My second area is player collecting, and Matthew Wolff is where I've decided to go for my kids. If they inherit my collection, or if I ever have to sell my collection, I guess I apologize to my future self or my kids, because the Matthew Wolff collection is unlikely to maintain any value in the future. Yet I spend hundreds of dollars. Overall, I've spent over $1,000 on my Matthew Wolff PC. And it's just because I have these personal connections to Matthew Wolff. And once I started it, I kind of went down too far, to the point where I probably couldn't recoup costs that I put into his collection. I could collect 1/10 of what I put into it. And so I said, I'm not giving up on this. And so now it's not as much of a satisfactory lane for me, but I still pick up Matthew Wolff cards for a couple dollars here and there, because I'm the Matthew Wolff guy. There's nobody else who does that. And the third area, or the third lane that I'm collecting in, is this cosmic set. Once I completed the set of all the golfers, again, I said, what can I do next? Well, I'm going to get them all on PSA 10. So now my hobby experience is grading these cards, trying to complete the set in PSA 10. So I'm still having to buy some duplicates and triplicates of cards I already have. And the Goodwins Champions decided to make this a reoccurring inserts or parallel year over year. So there's 2021, 22, and 2023 cosmic cards. So now I've got cards to chase year over year. So that's kind of what I found success in my own identity in the hobby, is these ultra modern sets that are new, shiny, that nobody else has really latched onto.
And it's interesting too, not just you, but this is 1,000 people in the hobby. My IG handle is Iowa Dave Sports Cards, but Iowa is an identifying marker. Yours is the golf card collector. And you mentioned '08 Topps Chrome, but let's say if you decided to revisit that, all of a sudden you've got this conflict going on between how you identify yourself into the Instagram portion of the hobby and what it is that you're collecting. And if you were to, let's say if you collected the orange refractors out of that '08 set, I say that because last year I found that Shaq card in an orange. I think it was out of 25. It was so pretty. It was probably the most striking Shaq card I've ever seen in person. And I would like to figure out who he's blocking in that picture, because he is just swallowing them up. But yeah, but you have chosen, and I have chosen, to announce who we are or where we are or what we do into the collection based on how we have just named ourselves and created these social avatars in a sense. But I think you're right. I think identity is such a big part of this hobby. And I think if we were to give truth serum to 100 people who collect cards, a lot of them would be, and I don't want to point finger for myself, for example, that we are here because we love the cards. And there are times where I'll just pull up my collection probably a couple times a week and we'll just thumb through it. I'll get a lot of joy and satisfaction out of it. But being completely honest, part of it too is trying to launch myself into a community and to have a place and to widen my social world in some way, right? And the way to do that is to create some identifying markers for yourself. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. I think that's just a sort of a natural outgrowth of what it means to join a hobby that has already existed and been established before you even joined it.
Yeah, in Instagram, I am the golf card collector, but in reality, I collect probably 4 or maybe even 5 different sports. I like niche things that I personally connect with. So I used to be a cross-country runner, so I like looking for runner cards. There's a couple athletes that I used to compete with and train with that are from my hometown or home area, and they have cards. So from Goodwins Champions, when they were Olympians 10 years ago. And so I bought their autograph cards. I like UFC. I'm not a violent person, but for some reason, I quite enjoy this sport. And, I collect certain cards. I've had to sell most of them because it's not my lane. But it's okay because I can hold on to a few of them that really resonate with me and kind of enjoy that, year or a few months where I was a little bit obsessed with UFC cards, and then keep a couple that still kind of connect. And that's what I ended up doing with 2008 Topps Chrome. It's a set that I opened. I opened the Topps flagship set, and I opened a hobby box of the Chrome product, and I pulled the LeBron refractor. And that's the iconic card where he's doing the chalk toss up in the air. And I in one box, I got that base card and the refractor. And this will show, that was around the time where I was first getting into sports cards, because I didn't know the difference between refractors, base cards, serial number. And I remember looking at the refractor and thinking, wow, this one looks a lot nicer than my other copy. The letters they're shiny compared to, and I didn't notice the whole card was shiny. I just noticed the letters popped out more. I'm like, why don't they just do all the letters like that? And then I got an orange refractor and a gold refractor in the box, and I saw these don't fit in my set. I'm trying to collect all the cards, and now it sticks out on the page in my binder. Like, why do I want a gold card with some numbers on it? Of course, looking back, I wish I had been more keen on some of these parallels. What I decided to do to encapsulate that area of collecting for me is to hold on to a couple of important cards that I personally opened. And to round it out, there's only one other card I want to kind of complete that era for me. So I have the LeBron refractor, and so I want to pair that with the Kobe refractor because those are the two iconic cards from that set. The Kobe is a beautiful image of Kobe holding the ball and LeBron in a full-on squat, wide wing bird pose guarding him. And they're so close and it's so intense. He could probably just wrap his arms around and hug Kobe. So it's kind of like I can think there's two cards I want from this set. Once I get them both, I'm done. And from the Topps paper hobby box, I actually pulled a super short print Barack Obama where he's shooting a basketball. I don't know if it's considered his rookie card. I think it's right up there with the first Obama card to get printed. And when I looked at the PSA Pop report, there was only 78 of them graded, so it's pretty short printed. So that one I'll probably keep for my PC unless someone were to pay $5,000 or $10,000 for it.
Sure. Have you ever sold or moved a card that you didn't really necessarily want to move because it would free up resources to get something else that you felt like you needed or wanted to get?
Yeah, all the time. And a cycle that I'm personally stuck in is having to sell the card because I've already overspent or overcommitted. And I really wish that I could just get ahead of it. I've got 2 kids, I've got a very busy job, and it's hard for me to sit down for an hour and make a plan. Because whenever I have time for the hobby, I want to be recording content for my podcast. I want to be, flipping through my cards and enjoying them. I want to be getting my next grading submission prepared. I want to be, surfing eBay and scrolling through my saved searches. I don't want to be putting intentional brain power towards planning. And yet that's what I need. So an example would be I purchased a Phil Mickelson rookie autograph card. And it's his main, rookie auto. I think it's serial number to 799, so there's nearly 800 copies in the world. And I, for about 2 months, was trying to buy one. I was bidding on auctions. I was talking to people in my community. I ended up connecting with someone in the community who was willing to sell his because he was basically unloading his entire collection. And so I bought it for a price that I thought was pretty reasonable, and he threw in a couple of other cards that I would enjoy in the deal. And when I received it, it was a bit lackluster. It's a card I still want to this day, and the only thing I can think of why the card wasn't perfect for me is that I looked through all over the card, and the condition wasn't pristine. It wasn't exactly what I wanted. There was maybe one soft corner. There was a print line that went through Phil Mickelson's body. I'm okay with a print line if it's kind of in the border or down at the bottom of the card or whatever, but the fact it kind of went right through his shoulder and vertically through his torso, you can't see it if you just are glancing at the card, but when you've got it under light and you can see it affect his appearance. And I kind of resented the card because of that. And so one month when I had overspent and I needed to collect some hobby funds to pay my credit card bill, he eventually got to the chopping block, and I was kind of sad to let it go. But what I convinced myself is that there were 798 other copies in the world. I'm sure one of them doesn't have that print line. And so there's probably a version of this card that's better suited for me. And that's what I did to convince myself. And since then, I haven't felt the impulse or the urge to buy another copy of that card, because if I were to prioritize, that one wouldn't be in my top 20 chase cards. It would kind of fall further down the list. So I use the funds to buy probably some cosmic cards and some diamond relics that, really feed more into my identity and my fulfillment in the hobby. So I don't regret it. What I wish I could have done better is if I had been able to plan, I could go through my boxes of lower end cards. And if I had the time to list them on eBay, or if I found cards that were in that range where it might make sense to use for a consigner, because you can't send a $5 card to a consigner because they're going to charge you $3 or $4 fees anyways. Plus you have to pay cost to send it to the consigner. So I wish I had spent time to go through my box and accumulated 30 low end cards that I did enjoy when I got them, but aren't filling any hole in my heart right now. And, list the ones that make sense myself on eBay and the ones that are in the $20 to $75 range, send them off to whatever consignment service. That way I could keep this large card that did have a place in my PC and kind of offload some of the fodder.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that. I think there are lots of people who have cards they wish they hadn't sold, and thank you for sharing that. When I think about that, I don't necessarily think about cards that we have to sell, and then down the line, oh, I kind of wish I had that. When I think about it, when I turn the light back on me with this, I think about cards that I tell myself I suddenly don't want, just because selling them will give me the opportunity to buy something. I don't even know what that would necessarily would be. Um, I've been able to keep my budget self-contained, but the frustration that creates is when I'm not able to build up a pool of funds quick enough. And so a card that maybe 6 months or a year ago or a month ago seemed like the most special and important card in the world to advance whatever my PC was going to be, I suddenly look at that as an asset to move. I'm not sure what to do about that necessarily. There's somebody I've been trying to get on my podcast for a little while. His name is Jason, and nobody in the Instagram community or Twitter or Facebook would know who he is because he has no social media presence. He's been a collector for 15, 20, 30 years, who knows how long. And I want to get him on just because no one knows who he is and he's fascinating in the extent of when he pulls out his case of cards, and he lives around me, so that's how I know him, and he's in the LCS a lot. He pulls out, to borrow a hobby cliche, straight fire. And I'm talking about things like rookie gold trout autos, the type of thing that when it hits the golden auction, people start putting out content about it. And I see it, and I've never asked him why he doesn't do it, but he doesn't care, right? To him, his collection is very personal to him. He's not married, he doesn't have kids. So I think if I'm playing pop psychologist in a way, I think his collection is his baby in a way. But I really want to get him on to pick his brain to get his collecting philosophy. Like what is he going about? What is he trying to build? Um, what is he trying to build? And what are his goals? What are his long-term goals? And how does he view his collection in the world of baseball card collecting and sports card collecting? And I get the feeling that he would scoff or roll his eyes at the idea of there is no world of collecting. It's just him and what he does. But I do wonder if someone like him, how he has been able to be patient or if he has regrets as well. Because I suspect that it's something that we all come across, right? We all come across in this hobby. And I realize I'm rambling a little bit, but as we wind down, it's my fault if you're listening to this. We have a hard stop here coming up in just a few minutes. I guess the thing I would want to ask you about is if you saw someone who had this mega valuable collection that was also very focused, because Jason is also very focused, what would you want to know about his ability to focus and never share what he has and just be able to enjoy what he's built purely on the merits of his own understanding and his own satisfaction without needing any sort of apparent external input, other than I know he's got some friends who he hangs out with and he goes to national with friends, but he never posts a single thing. Where does your mind go when I talk about someone like that?
My mind goes to the theme of my own podcast, Fondling Cardboard. The reason I made this podcast was to dive into why I collect and to share collectors' stories. So, I guess in simple terms, the one thing I would want to know is what drives you to collect in the first place? When I look at the hobby activity I've been doing, kind of chasing this hamster wheel, I told myself, I put myself into these positions where I've overspent and now I need to sell something or I need to make ends meet by messing up some of the projects I'm working on. I told myself that I'm experiencing these issues because I'm just so enthusiastic. I'm just so in the hobby these days. But in reality, it could be that identity, outward facing image that I have and feeling like I have to post frequently and therefore I need to buy frequently or I need stimulation in order for my hobby experience to be validated. Someone like your friend Jason, not having those external influences can sit there probably for months and be patient and really want what they want. And when they're scrolling through eBay listings and they come across a card listed for $12 that they know used to sell for $20 or $30, he's probably not hit with that itch thinking, this is good value and, I really love this. He's probably thinking, well, that's going to be $12 plus shipping that I spend now. And he probably has a reflection knowing that if he receives it a month from now, he probably won't care. So if I were you and you were able to get Jason on the show, I would probably ask questions, about his pace, about his tempo of collecting. I don't know exactly what questions those would be, but I would try and dig for nuggets on how you and I and all the listeners can kind of lean into that pace of life in the hobby rather than the hamster wheel that I've personally been experiencing.
Sure. Well, there's no good, subtle way to end this conversation. So I think we'll just stop there and hopefully pick this up again at some point in the future because this feels not like a self-contained episode. This feels like part one of a larger discussion. So, Mike, thank you for having this conversation today.
You bet, Dave. Check out my Instagram at The Golf Card Collector, and my podcast is Fondling Cardboard.
And that typically comes out on Fridays, right?
Yeah, I typically stay up late Thursday evening to do my editing and publishing, so Friday morning you should see it first thing. I'm the golf card collector, so there's a flavor of golf cards on the podcast, but it's certainly, not just about golf. It's about my intent is to discover why I collect cards and share other collector stories.
It's a terrific podcast. I'm not a golf card collector, but I am a devoted religious listener. So, Mike, thanks and take care.
Thanks, Dave.